In downtown San Francisco, a quietly brilliant systems architect was about to watch yet another stranger be handed the legacy she built. What started as a hopeful walk into a boardroom turned into a cold betrayal when she came face to face with her replacement, the eighth, but this time the last. Mira Devlin wasn't your typical tech strategist. For 8 relentless years, she had designed and defended the architecture behind Pinnacle Vault's world-class fraud detection systems, known for their silent precision and unshakable integrity. When she encountered a CEO's smile and a board's applause for her own algorithms, rebranded and stripped of credit, she had no idea she was walking into the beginning of a calculated reckoning. Mira responded with quiet resolve, a response that would lead to the slow, surgical unraveling of an empire. What began as a demotion to a forgotten office on the 14th floor would become a revolution in how corporations account for truth. The glass towers of Silicon Valley would never be the same after one engineer proved that data remembers everything, even when people try to forget. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The boardroom smelled like leather and ambition when I walked in that Tuesday morning. 37th floor corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking San Francisco Bay. 8 years ago this room had been a converted storage closet, with folding chairs and a whiteboard covered in my handwriting. Now it housed a mahogany conference table that cost more than most people's cars. I took my usual seat third from the head, knowing this might be the last time I sat there as an equal. The other board members filtered in with their ritual small talk about weekend plans and stock prices. Ellen Marquez gave me a slight nod, professional but warm. She'd been pushing for this appointment harder than anyone. Silas Grant avoided eye contact entirely, which should have been my first warning. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this morning. Board Chair Davidson's voice carried that practiced authority that came from decades of making announcements that changed lives. As you know, we've been conducting an extensive search for Pinnacle Vault's next chief executive officer. My heart hammered against my ribs. 8 times I'd sat in variations of this moment. 8 times I'd watched them choose someone else, someone younger, flashier, better at playing the game I never learned the rules to. But this time felt different. The metrics were undeniable. Revenue up 43% year over year. Client retention at an all-time high. The fraud detection platform I'd architected from scratch was being licensed by Fortune 500 companies across 3 continents. After careful deliberation, we're excited to introduce Colton Reese as Pinnacle Vault's new CEO. The words hit like cold water. A man I'd never seen before stepped through the side door, all polished smile and expensive suit. 40-something with the kind of confident posture that suggested he'd been preparing for this moment his entire life. The room erupted in polite applause while I sat frozen, trying to process what was happening. Colton comes to us with an impressive track record of scaling consumer-facing tech companies. Davidson continued reading from prepared remarks. His vision for brand evolution and market expansion aligns perfectly with our growth trajectory. Brand evolution. Market expansion. Corporate speak for we want someone who looks good on magazine covers and CNBC interviews. Someone who could make Pinnacle Vault sexy to investors who cared more about buzz than actual innovation. Colton stepped forward, radiating the kind of charisma that filled rooms and emptied critical thinking. Thank you, Richard. I'm honored to be here and excited to build on the incredible foundation that's been established. His eyes swept the room, landing on me for exactly 2 seconds. I want to particularly acknowledge the legacy contributions of our technical team. Their innovation has been the backbone of everything we've accomplished. Legacy contributions. Past tense. As if my work belonged to history instead of the present. As if the algorithms running silently in our servers 24/7 keeping millions of transactions secure were museum pieces instead of living, breathing systems that required constant refinement. Moving forward, we'll be implementing some strategic restructuring to better align our resources with our vision. Colton's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. I'll be working closely with each department head to identify opportunities for optimization. Optimization. Another euphemism. I'd heard it before, usually right before budgets got slashed and teams got reorganized out of existence. The meeting dissolved into handshakes and congratulations. Ellen caught my eye across the room, her expression unreadable. Silas materialized beside me with his trademark diplomatic smile, the one that had helped him survive 3 CEO transitions without ever taking a real stand. Exciting times ahead, Mira. His voice carried that careful neutrality he'd perfected over years of corporate navigation. Change can be uncomfortable, but it often brings new opportunities. I nodded because speaking felt dangerous. Because I could feel something building in my chest that wasn't quite anger yet but might become something worse if I let it breathe. After the crowd dispersed, I found myself alone with my coffee growing cold in the empty boardroom. Through the Windows, I could see the city stretching toward the horizon, all glass and steel and ambition. Somewhere down there in the maze of startups and established tech giants were the competitors who'd tried to poach me over the years. The job offers I'd turned down out of loyalty to a company I'd helped build from nothing. My phone buzzed. Email from Jared Toke asking me to stop by his office. Jared, who'd started as a junior engineer on my team 5 years ago. Jared, who now carried the title Director of Innovation despite never having innovated anything more complex than a new coffee ordering system. I found him in his glass-walled office overlooking the engineering floor. The space that used to house servers and whiteboards now looked like a tech magazine photo shoot. Minimalist desk. Ergonomic everything. A wall of monitors displaying real-time analytics that he probably couldn't interpret without help. Mira, thanks for coming by. He gestured to a chair with the kind of false casualness that meant bad news was coming. I wanted to talk to you about some organizational changes. I sat and waited. Let him fill the silence with his discomfort. With Colton coming on board, there's going to be a shift in how we structure the technical teams. Jared's fingers drummed against his desk. Betraying the nervousness his voice tried to hide. Your expertise has been invaluable, but we're moving toward a more collaborative, integrated approach. More buzzwords. More carefully crafted language designed to obscure rather than illuminate. Your new title will be Systems Advisor, reporting to the Engineering Council rather than directly to executive leadership. He paused, waiting for my reaction. It's actually a compliment, Mira. It recognizes your deep institutional knowledge while freeing you from the administrative burden of strategic decision-making. Systems Advisor. From Chief Technical Strategist to Systems Advisor. From the room where decisions were made to the sidelines where advice was given and ignored. The demotion was wrapped in corporate gift paper, but it was still a demotion. I see. 2 words, because anything more would have revealed too much. Your office will be relocating to the 14th floor. Closer to the engineering teams you'll be supporting. Jared's smile was genuine now that he'd delivered the blow and survived my reaction. HR will handle the logistics. I walked out of his office and took the elevator down to 14. My new space was barely larger than a closet tucked between the server room and a supply closet. No windows. Fluorescent lighting that hummed with electrical interference. A desk that looked like it had been salvaged from a government surplus auction. I sat in the cheap office chair and pulled up my laptop. Muscle memory guided my fingers to the Vigil dashboard, the proprietary fraud detection system I'd built from the ground up. The one that processed millions of transactions daily and had saved Pinnacle Vault from at least 3 major security breaches that could have destroyed the company. The system was still running, still learning, still adapting to new threat patterns. Still bearing my digital signature in every line of code. And according to the access logs, I was still listed as the primary system administrator. Still had root access to the backend. Still held the keys to the one thing at Pinnacle Vault that couldn't be restructured or optimized or evolved without me. For the first time since walking into that boardroom, I smiled. Not from happiness but from recognition. They could move my office and change my title and erase my name from the organizational charts. But they couldn't rewrite the fundamental architecture of the systems that kept their company alive. The 14th floor smelled like industrial carpet and broken dreams. 3 weeks into my exile, I'd established a routine that felt like archaeology, digging through layers of code and data that no one else remembered existed. My windowless office had become a digital cave where I could work without interruption or observation. The Vigil system hummed quietly in the background, processing transactions and learning patterns just as I designed it to do. But Vigil was more sophisticated than anyone knew, including me, when I'd first built it. The fraud detection algorithms were just the surface layer. Beneath that was a comprehensive behavioral analysis engine that tracked user patterns, decision-making velocities, and what I privately called institutional trust metrics. I'd originally designed these features to identify insider threats and compromised accounts. The system monitored how employees interacted with sensitive data, how long they spent reviewing documents before approving them, and whether their approval patterns suggested automated or thoughtful decision-making. It was meant to catch hackers and embezzlers, not executives, but data doesn't discriminate. 3 months of post-reorganization logs told a fascinating story. Colton Reese had been granted administrative access to 17 different systems on his first day. In the 3 weeks since then, he'd logged meaningful time in exactly 3 of them. His document review patterns suggested he was approving reports in under 90 seconds, regardless of length or complexity. Either he was the fastest speed reader in corporate history, or he wasn't actually reading anything. Jared Toke was worse. His innovation reports, the ones he presented to department heads with such confidence, showed disturbing metadata patterns. 60% of his recent presentations contained blocks of text with creation timestamps that didn't match his login history. The writing style analysis algorithm I'd built to detect plagiarized client proposals was flagging his work for what appeared to be AI-generated content. But the most interesting discovery was buried in the collaboration logs. The new fraud detection enhancements that Colton had announced with such fanfare last week? The ones Jared claimed to have architected? The system logs showed they were minor modifications to frameworks I'd built 2 years ago. Frameworks that had been sitting dormant in the development environment waiting for implementation approval that never came. They weren't just failing to innovate. They were repackaging my old work and calling it breakthrough thinking. A soft knock interrupted my digital detective work. Angela Lynn stood in my doorway holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who'd been thinking dangerous thoughts. Mind if I come in? She'd been Pinnacle Vault's lead data privacy officer for 4 years and the closest thing I had to an ally in the building. Sharp legal mind wrapped in diplomatic packaging with a talent for asking uncomfortable questions. In comfortable ways. Please. I gestured to the only other chair in my coffin-sized office. Though I should warn you, association with the departed might hurt your career prospects. Angela closed the door behind her and settled into the chair. That's actually what I wanted to talk about, asterisk. She handed me one of the coffees and kept her voice low. I've been watching the leadership transition closely. Professionally, of course. Of course. Angela never did anything that wasn't professionally justified. It was one of her most valuable traits and occasionally her most frustrating one. I've noticed some concerning patterns in how sensitive data is being handled. She paused, sipping her coffee while choosing her words carefully. Nothing illegal, you understand. Just sloppy, rushed. As if the people making decisions don't fully understand what they're approving. I leaned back in my chair studying her face. Angela had survived 3 corporate restructurings by being politically neutral and ethically uncompromising. If she was here sharing concerns, it meant something significant was troubling her. What kind of sloppiness? I asked. Client data. Retention policies being modified without proper review. Security protocols being streamlined in ways that introduce vulnerabilities. And yesterday I discovered that someone approved a third-party integration that shares customer behavioral data with a marketing analytics firm. Angela's voice carried the controlled tension of someone trying not to show how alarmed they were. The integration was approved by Jared, but the technical review shows he couldn't have understood what he was signing off on. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. The marketing integration she was describing would violate the privacy frameworks I'd spent years building into our client contracts. Frameworks that had become selling points for customers who chose us specifically because we didn't monetize their data. How bad is it? I asked. Potentially very bad. If our clients discover we're sharing their transaction patterns with third parties, we could face regulatory investigations and contract violations worth millions. Angela leaned forward, lowering her voice further. But here's the thing, Mira. I don't think they know what they've done. I don't think anyone in the current leadership structure understands the systems well enough to make these decisions safely. We sat in silence for a moment, letting the implications settle. Then Angela asked the question I'd been avoiding since my demotion. Is there any way to monitor what they're doing? Some kind of oversight system that could flag dangerous decisions before they become disasters? I looked at her carefully, weighing how much to reveal. Angela was trustworthy, but she was also legally minded. If I told her about Vigil's behavioral monitoring capabilities, she might feel obligated to report it as a potential privacy violation. But if I didn't tell her, someone was going to make a decision that destroyed the company I'd spent 8 years building. Hypothetically speaking, I said slowly, if such a system existed, it would need to be completely secure. Encrypted end-to-end. With access limited to people who understood both the technical and legal implications. Angela nodded, understanding the careful language. Hypothetically, such a system would need to be managed by someone with deep institutional knowledge and unquestioned ethical standards. We looked at each other across my tiny desk, 2 women who'd watched their life's work being casually dismantled by people who confused confidence with competence. I might be able to help with the hypothetical legal framework, Angela said. If someone were to build such a system. And I might know someone with the technical expertise to implement it. I replied. She finished her coffee and stood up. I should get back to my office. But Mira? If anything develops that needs attention, please don't hesitate to reach out. After she left, I turned back to my laptop and opened the Vigil administrative console. The behavioral monitoring system was already running, but it was configured for external threat detection. With a few modifications, I could expand its scope to include internal decision-making patterns, executive approval velocities, and what I'd started thinking of as institutional integrity metrics. It would take some careful coding to ensure the system was legally compliant and ethically defensible. But if Angela was right about the dangerous decisions being made in ignorance, someone needed to be watching. Someone needed to be keeping score. I started typing new code flowing through my fingers like a language I'd been born speaking. The system would be invisible to casual users but comprehensive in its monitoring. It would track everything and judge nothing, letting the data speak for itself. They'd buried me in this windowless office thinking I was neutralized. What they didn't understand was that I'd just been given unlimited time and complete privacy to do what I did best: build systems that revealed truth. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the main auditorium with mandatory attendance for all staff. I arrived 5 minutes early and took a seat in the back corner where I could observe without being observed. The energy in the room felt different from the usual quarterly updates, more excitement mixed with nervous anticipation. Colton took the stage with the kind of confident stride that suggested he'd been preparing for this moment. Behind him, a massive screen displayed the Pinnacle Vault logo alongside text that read, "Evolution through Innovation, our next chapter." "Good morning, everyone." His voice carried easily through the room, aided by a wireless microphone and years of public speaking experience. 3 weeks ago, I stood before the board and made a commitment to build on the incredible foundation you've all created. Today, I want to share how we're going to do that. The presentation began with familiar corporate theater, market opportunity slides showing exponential growth curves, competitive analysis positioning Pinnacle Vault as the leader in fraud detection technology, customer testimonials praising our platform's accuracy and reliability. Then came the pivot. But leadership isn't just about maintaining what exists, Colton continued, clicking to a new slide. It's about evolving. It's about taking proven concepts and reimagining them for the next generation of challenges. The screen filled with a diagram that made my coffee turn bitter in my mouth. It was the fraud detection architecture I designed 2 years ago, presented as if it were revolutionary new thinking. The same algorithms, the same data flow patterns, the same security protocols I'd spent months perfecting and years refining. "I'm excited to introduce Sentinel, our next-generation fraud prevention platform." Colton's smile was radiant as he gestured toward the screen. Built from the ground up using breakthrough behavioral analysis and predictive modeling techniques. Built from the ground up. The phrase hit like a slap. Every element on that screen had emerged from my code, my analysis, my late nights debugging edge cases that no one else wanted to tackle. And now it was being presented as original innovation with no mention of its actual origins. Jared Toke took the stage beside Colton, looking like a man who'd won the lottery and couldn't quite believe his luck. "Thank you, Colton. I'm proud to have led the development of Sentinel over the past 18 months. 18 months. I'd started building the behavioral analysis engine 18 months ago as an experimental enhancement to our existing fraud detection capabilities. Jared had been tangentially involved, providing feedback on user interface mockups and attending progress meetings where he mostly checked his phone. The breakthrough came when we realized that traditional fraud detection was too reactive. Jared continued, warming to his revised history. We needed something proactive. Something that could identify suspicious patterns before they became actual threats. He was reciting my own words back to me. The exact phrases I'd used in design meetings. When explaining why behavioral analysis was the next logical evolution of fraud prevention. The rationale I'd presented to executive leadership who'd shelved the project as too experimental and resource-intensive. The presentation continued with technical details that Jared delivered with surprising fluency. Until I realized he wasn't improvising, he was reading from slides that contained text lifted directly from my original project documentation. Documentation that had been sitting in the development repository for months, marked as pending approval. The system uses machine learning to establish baseline behavioral patterns for individual users and organizations, Jared explained while the screen showed flowcharts I'd drawn on whiteboards during late-night architecture sessions. When someone deviates from their established pattern, the system can flag the activity for review in real time. Real time? That had been the hardest part to implement, requiring a complete restructuring of our data processing pipeline. I'd spent 3 weeks optimizing database queries and caching strategies to make real-time analysis feasible without degrading system performance. Now Jared was describing those optimizations as if he'd engineered them himself. The audience was engaged, asking technical questions that Jared answered with increasing confidence. Some of the questions came from engineers who'd worked with me on the original prototypes. They had to know this wasn't Jared's work, but none of them spoke up. None of them pointed out the obvious historical revisionism happening on stage. "We're planning a gradual rollout starting with our Tier 1 clients," Colton announced, retaking control of the presentation. "Initial testing shows a 30% improvement in threat detection with a 60% reduction in false positives." Those numbers were real. I'd spent months fine-tuning the algorithms to achieve exactly those performance improvements. The beta testing had been conducted using my code running on servers I'd configured with security protocols I'd designed. But according to this presentation, none of that work belonged to me anymore. I pulled out my phone and quietly opened the Vigil dashboard. The behavioral monitoring system I'd enhanced over the past few weeks had been silently documenting this entire charade. Every slide Jared presented was automatically scanned for metadata analysis. Every claim was cross-referenced against development repository timestamps. The results were damning. 78% of Jared's technical content showed creation dates that predated his involvement in the project by months. The presentation slides themselves contained embedded revision histories showing my name as the original author before being edited to remove attribution. But what caught my attention was something more subtle. The enhanced monitoring system was flagging linguistic patterns in both Colton's and Jared's speeches. Phrases like breakthrough thinking and next-generation approach appeared in there communications with suspicious frequency, often in contexts where they were describing work that existed before they arrived. The system wasn't just documenting plagiarism. It was identifying a pattern of systemic credit theft. As the presentation wound down, I noticed Angela sitting 3 rows ahead. She hadn't turned around to look at me, but her posture suggested she was thinking the same thoughts I was. This wasn't just corporate politics or leadership transition growing pains. This was deliberate erasure. Before we conclude, I want to emphasize that Sentinel represents everything Pinnacle Vault stands for, Colton said, bringing the presentation to its climactic finish. Innovation, excellence, and the courage to evolve beyond what we thought was possible. The applause was enthusiastic. Several people stood up, including some engineers who'd worked directly with me on the behavioral analysis algorithms now being celebrated as breakthrough innovation. I remained seated watching as Colton and Jared shook hands like co-conspirators who'd just pulled off the perfect heist. After the audience dispersed, I stayed in my seat reviewing the data Vigil had collected during the presentation. The pattern recognition algorithms were highlighting connections I hadn't consciously noticed. The timing of certain announcements. The careful coordination between Colton's vision statements and Jared's technical claims. This wasn't opportunistic credit theft. This was strategic intellectual appropriation. They'd identified my most valuable work, cataloged its components, and systematically rebranded it as their own innovation. And they'd done it so smoothly that even people who knew the truth were applauding the performance. I walked back to my 14th floor exile, feeling something shift inside me. Not anger exactly, but something colder and more focused. They could steal my work and erase my contributions, but they couldn't steal the systems that documented everything. The same behavioral analysis technology they just claimed as their own was quietly building a record of their deception. They'd made one critical mistake in their perfect heist. They'd left the original architect alive and given her unlimited access to the evidence locker. The 14th floor had become my underground laboratory. 2 weeks after the all-hands presentation, I'd established a routine that felt like investigative journalism crossed with digital archaeology. Every morning I arrived early, brewed coffee in the break room that smelled like industrial disinfectant, and settled into my windowless office to watch the data streams that told the real story of Pinnacle Vault's transformation. The behavioral monitoring system I'd enhanced was revealing patterns that would have been invisible to casual observation. Employee confidence metrics were declining across all departments, with the sharpest drops concentrated among senior engineering staff. The people who understood the technical foundations of our platform were losing faith in leadership at measurable rates. Internal collaboration scores painted an even grimmer picture. Cross-team communication was down 37% from pre-transition baselines. Code review cycles were extending as engineers spent more time double-checking work that should have been routine. The institutional trust that held complex organizations together was eroding in real time. But the most interesting data came from executive decision-making patterns. Colton's approval velocity had actually increased since the Sentinel presentation, suggesting he was spending even less time reviewing documents before signing off on them. Jared's reports continued showing suspicious metadata patterns, with 85% of his recent technical content flagged for potential AI generation. They were succeeding in public while failing in private, and the systems I'd built were documenting every contradiction. A soft knock interrupted my analysis. Angela stood in my doorway holding a folder and wearing the expression of someone who discovered something troubling. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Can we talk? She asked, glancing down the hallway before stepping into my office. Always. I minimized the monitoring dashboard and gestured to the chair across from my desk. What's on your mind? She closed the door and sat down, clutching the folder like it contained dangerous secrets. I've been doing some research into our recent security changes. The ones Jared has been implementing as part of the Sentinel rollout. I leaned forward, sensing important information was coming. Remember the third-party integration I mentioned? The marketing analytics firm that's now receiving customer behavioral data? Angela opened her folder, revealing printed emails and technical specifications. I've been trying to understand the legal implications, and I discovered something concerning. She handed me a document showing the integration approval chain. Jared's digital signature appeared at the bottom, but the timestamp showed he'd signed off on the integration at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, exactly 17 minutes after the technical specification document had been created. 17 minutes, I said, reading her mind. To review a 43-page technical specification that requires understanding our data architecture, customer contracts, and privacy compliance frameworks. Angela's voice carried the controlled tension of someone trying not to show how alarmed they were. Either Jared has superhuman reading comprehension, or he approved something he never actually examined. I studied the document more carefully. The integration was even worse than Angela had initially described. It wasn't just sharing behavioral data, it was providing real-time access to customer transaction patterns, including timestamps, amounts, and merchant categories. The kind of information that could be used to build detailed profiles of individual spending habits. This violates our privacy commitments with at least 12 major clients, I said, scanning through the technical details. If they discover we're sharing this level of detail with third parties, we could face contract terminations worth tens of millions. That's what I was afraid of. Angela leaned back in her chair, looking exhausted. But here's the thing, Mira. When I tried to discuss my concerns with Jared, he acted like I was being unnecessarily paranoid. He said the integration had been thoroughly vetted by the technical team. Which technical team? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. That's what I asked. He couldn't give me specifics, just said it had been approved through proper channels. Angela paused, meeting my eyes. I've been thinking about our hypothetical monitoring system. If it existed, this might be exactly the kind of dangerous decision it was designed to catch. I turned to my laptop and opened a secure partition I'd created for sensitive analysis. The enhanced vigil system had been tracking not just approval patterns but also the technical implications of executive decisions. Cross-referencing approval timestamps with document complexity and potential risk factors. Hypothetically speaking, I said, pulling up a dashboard that showed executive decision-making risk metrics, such a system might have flagged 17 high-risk approvals in the past month. Decisions involving customer data security protocols and compliance frameworks that were approved without adequate review time. Angela leaned forward, studying the screen. The data was anonymized, but the patterns were clear. Someone in executive leadership was consistently approving complex technical changes without proper due diligence. Is there any way to predict what might happen next? She asked. I switched to a different dashboard showing trend analysis and risk projections. The system suggests we're approaching a tipping point. Client complaints are increasing. Employee confidence is declining. And the technical decisions being made without proper review are creating cumulative risk. As if summoned by our conversation, my email chimed with a new message. The sender was Ellen Marquez, and the subject line made my pulse quicken: Board Performance Review, Confidential Request. I opened the email while Angela watched. Ellen's message was brief but significant. Mira, I hope you're settling into your new role. The board is conducting a comprehensive performance review of all executive leadership, and I would value your technical perspective on recent organizational changes. Could you prepare a confidential assessment of system performance, client satisfaction, and operational efficiency since the transition? I need someone with deep institutional knowledge to provide context that might not be visible in standard reports. Please treat this as sensitive board business. Angela and I looked at each other across my tiny desk. This was the opportunity I'd been unconsciously preparing for. The chance to let the data speak truth to power without appearing vindictive or personally motivated. How long would it take to prepare something comprehensive? Angela asked. I thought about the months of data I'd been collecting. The behavioral analysis, the decision-making patterns, the risk assessments and performance metrics that painted a complete picture of Pinnacle Vault's transformation. All anonymized, all documented, all ready to be compiled into a report that would let the numbers tell their own story. 72 hours, I said. Maybe less if I focus on the most critical patterns. Angela stood up and walked to my office window, which looked out onto an alley filled with dumpsters and delivery trucks. You know, this could change everything, she said quietly. Once the board sees actual data about what's been happening, there won't be any way to unsee it. I joined her at the window, looking out at the narrow slice of sky visible between buildings. Maybe it's time they saw it, I said. Maybe it's time someone held up a mirror. She turned to face me, and I saw something like relief in her expression. I'll help however I can. Legal review, document preparation, whatever you need. After Angela left, I returned to my desk and opened a new document. Executive Performance Assessment, Confidential Board Review, I typed at the top. Below that, I began outlining the structure of a report that would let truth speak louder than politics. The data was all there waiting to be organized and presented. Months of behavioral analysis, decision-making patterns, risk assessments, and performance metrics that told the story of what happened when competence was replaced by charisma. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was simply preparing to answer a direct question from board leadership with the kind of comprehensive data-driven analysis I'd been providing for 8 years. The same rigorous approach that had built Pinnacle Vault's reputation for reliability and precision. The only difference was that this time the analysis would focus internally instead of externally. This time the fraud detection would be pointed at the fraudsters. Friday afternoon arrived with the kind of gray October drizzle that made San Francisco feel like a city wrapped in gauze. I was deep in data correlation analysis when my email chimed with a message that would make everything else irrelevant. The sender was Rebecca Chen, Director of Fraud Prevention at Meridian Financial, one of our largest clients. The subject line read, "Urgent, System Performance Issues," but what caught my attention was the CC list. It included my old email address, the one tied to my former executive role, not the generic systems advisor account I'd been relegated to. I opened the message with growing curiosity that quickly transformed into something colder. "Hi team, I hope you can help us understand some concerning patterns we've noticed in our fraud detection reports over the past 3 weeks. Our internal analysis shows a significant increase in false positives along with several missed threats that should have been caught by your behavioral analysis system. We're seeing legitimate transactions flagged as suspicious while actual fraudulent activity is slipping through undetected. I've attached detailed logs for your review, but the summary is troubling. Detection accuracy appears to have dropped from your usual 93% to around 78%. More concerning, our customers are starting to complain about legitimate purchases being blocked while fraudsters are successfully completing transactions that should have triggered immediate alerts. I was hoping to speak directly with whoever designed the original behavioral analysis algorithms. Our technical team has some specific questions about parameter configuration and threshold adjustment that require deep system knowledge. Can someone put me in touch with the original architect? We need to resolve these issues quickly before they impact our customer relationships. I stared at the screen, feeling a mix of validation and alarm. The performance degradation Rebecca was describing aligned perfectly with what my monitoring systems had been documenting. The Sentinel rollout had introduced changes to algorithms I'd spent years optimizing, and the results were exactly what I'd predicted when I'd seen Jared's modifications. But what made this email revolutionary wasn't just the performance complaints. It was the fact that Rebecca had accidentally CC'd my old executive account, creating a paper trail that bypassed the new organizational structure. This wasn't internal monitoring or behavioral analysis. This was external validation from a major client who had no idea about Pinnacle Vault's recent leadership changes. I immediately forwarded the email to a secure folder and began cross-referencing Rebecca's complaints with the data I'd been collecting. The patterns matched perfectly. False positive rates had increased by exactly the amount her team was reporting. Missed threats corresponded to algorithm modifications that Jared had implemented without understanding their downstream effects. My phone buzzed with a text from Angela. "Coffee break? Something interesting to discuss." I found her in the cafeteria, sitting at a corner table with her laptop open and her expression carefully neutral. She waited until I sat down before speaking. "I just received something unusual," she said, keeping her voice low. "A client complaint that was accidentally sent to me instead of current leadership." "Meridian Financial?" I asked. Her eyebrows rose. "You got it too?" "CC'd on my old email address. Rebecca Chen is looking for the original system architect." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "Angela, the performance issues she's describing match exactly what my monitoring systems have been documenting. The Sentinel modifications are causing measurable degradation in fraud detection accuracy." Angela's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "How bad is it?" I pulled up a dashboard on my phone showing anonymized performance metrics. 15% increase in false positives. 22% increase in missed threats. Client satisfaction scores dropping across all metrics related to system reliability. Jesus. Angela stared at the numbers. "If other clients are experiencing similar issues." "They are." I scrolled to additional data. "I've been monitoring customer support tickets and complaint patterns. Meridian is just the first client bold enough to ask for direct technical support." We sat in silence for a moment, processing the implications. This wasn't just internal politics or organizational growing pains. This was system failure that would eventually destroy client relationships and tank the company's reputation. What are you going to do? Angela asked. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with another email. This one was from David Park at Constellation Banking, another major client. The subject line read, System Performance Review Request, and it was also CC'd to my old executive email address. Another one, I said, showing Angela the subject line. I think we're about to see a cascade. She leaned back in her chair looking thoughtful. You know what this means, don't you? Client complaints bypassing current leadership and reaching you directly. They're essentially asking for the person who actually built these systems. I nodded, understanding the broader implications. And they're creating documentation of performance problems that current leadership can't explain or fix. This changes everything, Angela continued. Your board assessment for Ellen was going to be internal analysis. This is external validation from paying customers. She was right. Rebecca's email and any others that followed would provide independent corroboration of everything my monitoring systems had been documenting. It wasn't just behavioral analysis anymore, it was business impact analysis backed by client complaints and performance data. My laptop chimed with another email. Then another. By the time I'd finished reading, my coffee had gone cold and Angela was staring at me with something like amazement. How many? She asked. 6 major clients in the past hour. All reporting similar performance issues. All asking to speak with original system architects. I looked up from my screen, meeting her eyes. All accidentally CC'd to my old email address because their contacts are out of date. Angela began laughing, not from humor but from the kind of recognition that comes when chaos reveals hidden order. They don't even know what they don't know, she said. Current leadership probably has no idea these complaints are being sent to you directly. I was already thinking 3 moves ahead. I need to respond to these clients. Not as an official representative but as someone who can provide technical assistance while they work through proper channels. Careful, Angela warned. If you start providing direct client support without authorization, it could be seen as undermining current leadership. Or, I said slowly, it could be seen as customer service. Helping clients understand technical issues while they work through official support channels. Angela considered this carefully. If you're just providing clarification and technical education without making changes to live systems. Exactly. I'm not circumventing leadership. I'm just answering technical questions from clients who specifically requested the original architect's input. I was already drafting response emails in my head. And if those responses happen to document the technical reasons behind their performance issues, that's just thorough customer service. You're building a case file, Angela realized. Client complaints requesting your expertise combined with technical analysis of why their systems are failing. I nodded, feeling pieces click into place. Ellen asked for a comprehensive performance assessment. I was planning to provide internal data. But now I have external validation from major clients who are experiencing measurable problems with our core product. My phone buzzed again. Another client email, this one from Patricia Voss at Northwind Securities. The same pattern, system performance complaints CC'd to my old executive address with a specific request to speak with the original behavioral analysis architect. 7 clients now, I said, showing Angela the latest message. This isn't coincidence anymore. This is a pattern. Angela stood up, gathering her laptop. I need to get back to my office, but Mira? Document everything. Every client email, every technical response, every performance metric. If this escalates, and I think it will, you'll want complete records. After she left, I returned to my 14th floor bunker and began the most important work I'd done in months. Not code this time, but communication. Careful professional responses to client technical questions that just happened to reveal the scope of problems they were experiencing. To Rebecca Chen at Meridian Financial, I wrote a detailed explanation of how behavioral analysis thresholds worked and why recent modifications might have affected accuracy. I included specific parameter recommendations and offered to provide additional technical consultation through proper company channels. To David Park at Constellation Banking, I outlined the relationship between algorithm configuration and false positive rates, explaining why certain changes could cause legitimate transactions to be flagged incorrectly. I suggested specific diagnostic tests his team could run to isolate the problems. Each response was professional, helpful, and meticulously documented. Each response also created a paper trail showing that major clients were experiencing serious problems with systems that had been working flawlessly under my management. By 6 p.m. I had detailed technical correspondence with 9 different clients, all of whom were reporting similar performance degradation, all of whom had specifically requested to work with the original system architect. The pattern was unmistakable. And the documentation was comprehensive. I compiled everything into a folder labeled Client Technical Support, October 2023, and copied it to the secure partition where I was building Ellen's board assessment. What had started as internal performance analysis was becoming something much more powerful: independent external validation of systemic failure. The monitoring systems I'd built were designed to detect fraud, and I'd discovered something more valuable than financial crime. I'd uncovered competence fraud, leadership fraud, the kind of institutional deception that destroyed companies from the inside while looking successful from the outside. My phone buzzed with one final email of the day. Ellen Marquez asking for a status update on the board assessment and noting that the review timeline had been moved up due to emerging concerns about operational performance. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Not from schadenfreude but from professional satisfaction. After 8 years of building systems that revealed truth, I was finally pointing those systems at the people who needed scrutinizing most. The email that had changed everything wasn't just Rebecca Chen's complaint. It was the recognition that truth has its own momentum. Once you build systems that document reality, those systems keep working regardless of who's in charge. They'd tried to bury me on the 14th floor, but they'd accidentally given me the perfect laboratory for documenting their failures. And now their failures were documented not just in my behavioral analysis but in client complaints and performance data that couldn't be dismissed as internal politics. The revenge they'd unknowingly triggered wasn't emotional or vindictive. It was empirical. And empirical revenge was the most devastating kind because it was simply truth allowed to speak for itself. Monday morning arrived with the clarity that comes after weeks of building towards something inevitable. I'd spent the weekend organizing data into what would become the most comprehensive performance analysis in Pinnacle Vault's history. Not because I was seeking destruction, but because Ellen Marquez had asked for truth, and truth had its own demanding architecture. The board assessment had evolved far beyond what I'd originally envisioned. What started as internal behavioral monitoring had expanded to include client satisfaction metrics, operational efficiency analysis, risk assessment data, and now direct external validation from 9 major clients who were experiencing measurable system degradation. The pattern was undeniable when viewed comprehensively. I arranged the data into 5 sections, each one building on the previous to create an irrefutable narrative. Executive decision-making patterns showed approval velocities and review timeframes that suggested inadequate due diligence. System performance metrics documented the technical degradation that had occurred since the leadership transition. Client impact analysis quantified the external consequences of internal changes. Risk assessment projected the likely outcomes if current trends continued. And finally, external validation presented the unsolicited client complaints that corroborated everything else. The beauty of the analysis was its objectivity. Every claim was supported by timestamp data, behavioral metrics, or direct client communication. There were no opinions or interpretations, just documented patterns that spoke for themselves. Even someone trying to dismiss the findings would struggle to argue with mathematics. I saved the completed assessment in a secure cloud folder labeled Board Performance Review, Confidential, and encrypted it with protocols I designed for our most sensitive client data. Then I sent Ellen a brief email noting that the comprehensive analysis she'd requested was complete and available for her review. Her response came within 20 minutes. "Thank you, Mira. I'll review this afternoon and may have follow-up questions. Please keep this confidential until the board has had time to analyze the findings." The waiting was the hardest part. I tried to focus on routine system maintenance and client support emails, but my attention kept drifting to the folder containing what might be the most important document I'd ever created. Not because it would destroy anyone, but because it would finally give truth the voice it deserved. Around 3 p.m. my secure email chimed with a message from Ellen. "Available for a brief call? I finished my initial review and have some questions." I dialed her direct line and she answered on the first ring. "Mira, thank you for preparing such a comprehensive analysis." Her voice carried the careful neutrality of someone processing disturbing information. "I need to verify something. The client emails you've included, these were sent directly to you?" "They were CC'd to my former executive email address," I explained. The client's contact lists hadn't been updated after the reorganization, so their technical support requests bypassed current leadership. "And you responded to these requests?" "I provided technical clarification and educational support while directing them to work through official channels," I said carefully. The clients had specific questions about system architecture that required deep technical knowledge. Ellen was quiet for a moment. "The performance degradation they're describing, your analysis suggests this is directly related to recent system modifications." "The correlation is statistically significant," I replied. "The algorithm changes implemented during the Sentinel rollout have introduced parameter shifts that affect detection accuracy in measurable ways." And the executive approval patterns you've documented, these are based on actual system logs? Timestamped approval data cross-referenced with document complexity and review timeframes, I confirmed. The behavioral analysis shows approval velocities that don't align with adequate due diligence for complex technical decisions. Another pause. Mira, I need to ask directly. Is this analysis influenced by personal concerns about the recent organizational changes? I'd been preparing for this question. Ellen, every data point in that assessment is verifiable through independent sources. Client emails, system logs, performance metrics, and approval timestamps. The analysis documents patterns that exist regardless of who interprets them. I understand. Her voice carried a note of something like resignation. I'm going to share this with the full board, but I wanted to discuss it with you first. Some of these findings are quite serious. I know, I said quietly. That's why I documented everything so carefully. After the call ended, I sat in my windowless office feeling something between anticipation and dread. The analysis was out of my hands, now flowing through channels where decisions were made by people who understood that institutional survival sometimes required difficult choices. My phone buzzed with a text from Angela. Everything okay? Heard. There was a board call this afternoon. I responded carefully. Ellen requested additional information about recent performance patterns. All routine. But nothing about this felt routine. I'd spent 8 years building systems that detected fraud and prevented institutional damage. Now those same systems were revealing that the institution itself had become the threat. The irony wasn't lost on me. The behavioral analysis algorithms I'd designed to catch external criminals had identified internal actors whose patterns suggested incompetence so profound it bordered on organizational sabotage. The same mathematical models that protected client assets were now protecting the company from its own leadership. Around 5 p.m. I received another encrypted email from Ellen. Board meeting scheduled for Wednesday morning. Your attendance may be requested to clarify technical aspects of the analysis. Please remain available. Wednesday morning. 2 days for the board to digest the findings and prepare whatever response truth demanded. 2 days for me to process the fact that everything I'd built over the past weeks was about to become the foundation for decisions I couldn't control or predict. I spent those 2 days in a strange state of suspended animation. I continued responding to client technical questions, monitoring system performance, and maintaining the behavioral analysis dashboard that had become my primary tool for understanding what was really happening at Pinnacle Vault. The data continued telling the same story. Client satisfaction declining. Employee confidence eroding. Executive decision-making patterns suggesting either incompetence or indifference to risk. The mathematical models didn't lie because they couldn't lie. They simply documented what existed and let others decide what to do about it. Tuesday evening I received a final email from Ellen. Please plan to attend tomorrow's board meeting at 9 a.m. Conference room A. Your technical expertise will be essential for our discussion. I arrived early Wednesday morning wearing the same professional attire I'd worn to every board meeting for 8 years. The same confidence born from years of building systems that worked and solving problems others couldn't diagnose. But this time I wasn't presenting solutions. I was presenting evidence. The boardroom felt different, somehow smaller despite its unchanged dimensions. Ellen sat at the head of the table with my printed analysis in front of her, marked with highlighter and handwritten notes. The other board members had similar copies along with laptops open to what I assumed were supplementary documents. Mira. Thank you for joining us, Ellen began with formal politeness. We've reviewed your performance analysis and have some questions about the technical findings. I took the same seat I'd occupied 8 years ago when I'd first presented the fraud detection platform that would become Pinnacle Vault's cornerstone product. The same seat where I'd explained how behavioral analysis could revolutionize financial security. The same seat where I'd been passed over for CEO 8 times. But today I wasn't asking for anything. Today I was simply answering questions about data that spoke louder than ambition ever could. The board would like to understand the implications of what you've documented, Ellen continued, and what recommendations you might have for addressing the performance issues you've identified. I looked around the table at faces I'd known for years. People who'd watched me build the company's technical foundation and then watched me be systematically marginalized by leaders who confused charisma with capability. Now those same people were asking me to explain why the house was falling down and how it might be rebuilt. The irony was perfect. They'd tried to erase me and ended up needing me to explain their own mistakes. They'd buried me in a windowless office where I'd had unlimited time to document their failures with the very systems they'd forgotten I controlled. I opened my laptop, pulled up the comprehensive dashboard I'd prepared, and began to explain exactly what the data revealed about their empire of illusion. The numbers told the story better than I ever could. The quarterly town hall was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the main auditorium with live streaming for remote employees and select industry media. Standard corporate theater designed to project confidence and maintain momentum during leadership transitions. What no one expected was for it to become the most documented institutional collapse in Silicon Valley history. I arrived at the auditorium 20 minutes early, taking a seat in the back row where I could observe without drawing attention. The energy felt different from previous town halls, more nervous excitement mixed with underlying tension that suggested people sensed something was shifting beneath the surface. Colton took the stage wearing his signature confident smile and a perfectly tailored navy suit that probably cost more than most employees made in a month. Behind him, the massive screen displayed polished graphics showing revenue growth, market expansion, and customer satisfaction metrics that told only the story leadership wanted to tell. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to what I believe will be a pivotal moment in Pinnacle Vault's evolution. His voice carried the practiced authority of someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of looking presidential. Today we're going to share some exciting developments that demonstrate why our strategic direction is exactly what the market demands. The presentation began with familiar corporate optimism, projected growth curves that assumed perfect execution, competitive analysis that positioned Pinnacle Vault as inevitable market leaders, customer testimonials carefully curated to support predetermined narratives. But I noticed something interesting in the technical setup. The presentation system was running on our internal network, which meant all displayed content was being processed through the same servers that hosted Vigil's monitoring systems. Every slide, every graphic, every data visualization was flowing through infrastructure I designed and still administered. I'm particularly excited to announce that our Sentinel platform has exceeded all performance expectations. Colton continued, clicking to a slide showing fabricated success metrics. Client adoption is accelerating and feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. From my position in the back row, I could see laptops and phones throughout the audience as employees followed along with the presentation. What they couldn't see was the real-time analysis happening in the background as Vigil's behavioral monitoring system processed the content being displayed. The system had been running continuously for weeks, documenting every aspect of executive performance. Every approval pattern, every decision timeline, every instance of content reuse or potential fraud. And according to the secure dashboard I was monitoring on my phone, that data had just become publicly accessible through what appeared to be a file-sharing misconfiguration. I watched in fascination as the technical catastrophe unfolded in slow motion. Someone had uploaded presentation materials to a shared directory that was configured for broad internal access. But the directory also contained other files, including automated reports generated by Vigil's monitoring systems. Reports that were now visible to anyone with basic network access. Jared took the stage beside Colton, looking confident as he prepared to present the technical achievements that would cement his reputation as an innovator. Thank you, Colton. I want to share some specific examples of how Sentinel is revolutionizing fraud detection for our enterprise clients. He clicked to advance the slide deck, and something unexpected appeared on the massive screen behind him. Instead of polished marketing graphics, the display filled with a comprehensive dashboard showing real-time performance metrics, executive approval velocities, content originality analysis, client satisfaction trends, risk assessment projections. The data that appeared wasn't the sanitized version prepared for public consumption. It was raw, unfiltered analysis showing the true state of Pinnacle Vault's operations. And according to those metrics, the company was failing catastrophically across every measurable dimension. Jared froze on stage, staring at the screen in confusion. Someone in the tech booth was frantically trying to advance to the correct slide, but the presentation system seemed locked on the monitoring dashboard. The audience began murmuring as people processed what they were seeing. Client satisfaction scores showing steady decline over the past 3 months. Employee confidence metrics indicating widespread loss of faith in leadership. Executive decision-making patterns suggesting approval processes that prioritized speed over accuracy. And most damaging of all, detailed analysis of content originality that flagged significant portions of recent executive communications as potentially AI-generated. Technical difficulties, Colton announced, trying to maintain his composure while signaling frantically to the production team. We'll have this resolved in just a moment. But the dashboard remained displayed in high definition for an audience that included engineers who understood exactly what they were looking at. People who could read behavioral analysis data and recognize institutional failure when it was quantified with mathematical precision. I checked my phone and discovered that the live stream was still broadcasting. The monitoring dashboard was being transmitted in real time to remote employees, industry media, and anyone else who'd tuned in to watch what they expected to be routine corporate communications. Social media began lighting up immediately. Screenshots, of the exposed data circulated through Twitter and LinkedIn with commentary from industry analysts who recognized the significance of what they were witnessing. Real-time documentation of executive incompetence being broadcast live during what was supposed to be a confidence-building presentation. The technical team finally managed to advance past the monitoring dashboard, but the damage was irreversible. The audience had seen comprehensive evidence that everything Colton and Jared had been claiming about Sentinel's success was contradicted by objective performance data. Jared attempted to continue his presentation, but his confidence had evaporated. He stammered through technical explanations that no longer carried any credibility since the audience had just seen analysis showing his reports were flagged for potential plagiarism and AI generation. The Sentinel platform represents a breakthrough in behavioral analysis, he said, reading from prepared remarks while avoiding eye contact with the audience. Our proprietary algorithms have achieved detection accuracy rates that exceed industry standards. Someone in the engineering section called out, "What about the client complaints?" referring to the customer satisfaction data that had been displayed moments earlier. The question was picked up by others as engineers who'd been quietly frustrated for months finally found their voices. "Why are false positive rates increasing if the system is working better?" asked another voice from the crowd. Colton attempted to regain control by moving to prepared talking points about market opportunity and competitive positioning. But the questions kept coming as people who understood the technical realities began demanding explanations for the contradictions they'd witnessed. The live stream chat exploded with commentary from viewers who were screenshot analysis posting detailed breakdowns of the exposed data. Technology journalists who tuned in expecting routine coverage suddenly had documentation of institutional fraud happening in real time. "I think we should wrap up today's presentation and follow up with individual departments," Colton announced, abandoning his prepared remarks. "Thank you all for your attention and your continued commitment to Pinnacle Vault's mission." The applause was scattered and uncomfortable. People filed out of the auditorium in clusters, talking quietly about what they'd witnessed. I remained in my seat watching the empty stage and processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. My phone buzzed with messages from colleagues who'd recognized the monitoring dashboard from my previous presentations. People who understood that the data they'd seen represented months of careful documentation. People who realized that the technical failure wasn't random but the inevitable result of systems designed to reveal truth. Angela appeared beside me looking stunned. "Did you know that was going to happen?" she asked quietly. "I knew the data existed," I replied honestly. "I didn't know it would become publicly accessible during a live presentation." She sat down beside me and we watched the production crew dismantling equipment in silence. "This changes everything, doesn't it?" she said finally. I nodded, understanding that we'd just witnessed something unprecedented. Not corporate sabotage or vindictive destruction, but truth asserting itself through systems designed to document reality. The monitoring infrastructure I'd built had simply done what it was programmed to do: reveal patterns and flag anomalies regardless of who those patterns implicated. "The beautiful thing about data," I said, standing up to leave, "is that it doesn't care about politics or personalities. It just documents what exists." As we walked out of the auditorium, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Not satisfaction exactly, but recognition. After years of being overlooked and marginalized, I'd finally built something that couldn't be ignored, dismissed, or explained away. The systems I'd created had just held up a mirror to institutional failure and broadcast the reflection to anyone willing to look. The aftermath began within hours and accelerated with the kind of momentum that comes when truth finally finds its voice. By Thursday morning, the exposed monitoring data had been downloaded, analyzed, and disseminated across social media platforms, industry blogs, and financial news networks. What started as a technical malfunction during a corporate presentation had become a case study in institutional transparency. I spent Thursday in my 14th floor office monitoring the cascade of consequences through news alerts, social media mentions, and internal communications that painted a comprehensive picture of organizational collapse happening in real time. The data spoke louder than any corporate response could have managed. TechCrunch published a detailed analysis titled, "When Fraud Detection Detects Executive Fraud," featuring screenshots from the town hall broadcast alongside expert commentary on behavioral analysis methodology. The article didn't just report on what had been exposed, it explained why the exposed data was so damaging to leadership credibility. The Wall Street Journal followed with a piece focused on the financial implications, noting that 3 major clients had already announced contract reviews pending resolution of performance issues. The stock price dropped 18% in after-hours trading as investors processed the implications of publicly documented executive incompetence. But the most devastating coverage came from Wired, which published a technical deep dive explaining how behavioral analysis systems worked and why the patterns revealed during the town hall suggested systematic problems with decision-making processes. The article included quotes from former Pinnacle Vault employees who corroborated the performance issues while maintaining professional anonymity. My secure email chimed with a message from Ellen Marquez requesting an emergency meeting. I found her in her office surrounded by printed articles, laptop screens showing declining stock prices, and legal pads covered with handwritten notes that suggested she'd been working through crisis management scenarios. "Mira, thank you for coming." She gestured to a chair across from her desk but remained standing herself, pacing behind her chair with nervous energy. "I need to understand exactly what happened yesterday." A file-sharing misconfiguration made internal monitoring data publicly accessible during the live stream, I explained factually. The presentation system pulled content from a directory that contained both marketing materials and automated analysis reports. The monitoring data that was exposed, that was generated by systems you administrate? The behavioral analysis platform has been running continuously as designed, I confirmed. It documents patterns and flags anomalies across all network activity, including executive communications and decision-making processes. Ellen stopped pacing and looked directly at me. "Mira, I need you to be completely honest. Was this intentional?" I met her gaze without hesitation. The monitoring systems were performing exactly as programmed. The file-sharing configuration that made the data accessible wasn't something I controlled or modified. She studied my expression carefully, then sat down heavily in her chair. "The board is meeting in emergency session this afternoon. We're facing client defections, regulatory inquiries, and media scrutiny that could destroy the company's reputation permanently." I waited for her to continue, knowing that crisis moments revealed institutional priorities with mathematical precision. "Jared submitted his resignation this morning," Ellen continued, reading from a document on her desk. "Effective immediately. Citing personal reasons and desire to pursue other opportunities. Colton is requesting a leave of absence pending board review of recent performance issues." The rats were abandoning ship with the kind of strategic timing that suggested they understood the implications better than their public statements indicated. Both men were creating distance between themselves and the exposed data before anyone could demand detailed explanations. "The clients who were CC'd on your technical consultations, they're requesting formal meetings to discuss system performance and reliability," Ellen said, consulting another set of notes. "Rebecca Chen at Meridian Financial wants to renegotiate contract terms based on documented performance degradation." I wasn't surprised. The client complaints I'd been tracking through my monitoring systems had provided early warning that external relationships were deteriorating. The town hall exposure had simply made private concerns public knowledge. "Ellen, what outcome is the board hoping to achieve?" I asked directly. She looked up from her notes with something like exhaustion in her expression. "Survival, Mira. We need to demonstrate that we're taking corrective action while maintaining enough credibility to retain our core client relationships." My phone buzzed with a text message from a number I didn't recognize. When I checked the screen, I saw a message that made everything else suddenly feel small and temporary. "Ms. Devlin, this is David Chen from Irongate Analytics. We've been following recent developments at Pinnacle Vault and would like to discuss opportunities for someone with your expertise. Are you available for a confidential conversation?" Irongate Analytics, the boutique firm that specialized in building ethical AI systems for financial institutions. The company that had been quietly recruiting top talent from established firms while maintaining a reputation for technical excellence and institutional integrity. I showed the message to Ellen, who read it with growing comprehension. "They're recruiting you," she said quietly. "Apparently." I put my phone away and refocused on the immediate crisis. "Ellen, what do you need from me?" "Honestly? We need you to help us rebuild credibility with clients who trusted your technical expertise more than our marketing messages." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "The board is discussing a significant reorganization, including potential changes to executive leadership structure." "What kind of changes?" "The kind that would put technical expertise ahead of presentation skills," Ellen said carefully. "The kind that would prioritize system reliability over brand evolution." I understood what she was suggesting without forcing her to articulate it directly. The board was considering walking back the leadership changes that had marginalized me while promoting executives who'd proven incompetent when subjected to objective analysis. "I appreciate the consideration," I said honestly. "But Ellen, I think we both know that trust takes years to build and seconds to destroy. What happened yesterday wasn't just about individual performance, it was about institutional priorities." She nodded, understanding the deeper implications. "You're saying the damage goes beyond personnel changes." "I'm saying that clients who've seen comprehensive documentation of how their technical concerns were ignored aren't going to regain confidence through organizational charts." I stood up, preparing to leave. "They're going to want proof that competence matters more than charisma." Ellen remained seated staring at documents that represented the collapse of everything the board had tried to achieve through leadership. Transition. What would it take to rebuild that proof? I paused at her office door considering the question carefully. Time, transparency, and the kind of institutional commitment to technical excellence that can't be faked or optimized or rebranded. We're willing to make that commitment, she said quietly. I know you are, Ellen. But I'm not sure the company is ready for the kind of fundamental changes that would require. I walked back to my office thinking about David Chen's message and the opportunity it represented. Not just a new job but a chance to build systems from the ground up without the baggage of institutional politics or the need to work around executives who confused confidence with competence. My laptop chimed with an email from Angela containing a single link to a LinkedIn post. When I clicked through, I found a detailed analysis written by a former Pinnacle Vault engineer who'd left 6 months earlier. The post was titled, "Why Good Engineers Leave, a Case Study in Institutional Fraud," and it included references to the town hall data alongside personal observations about technical decision-making processes. The post had been shared hundreds of times with comments from other former employees who corroborated the analysis while adding their own examples of technical expertise being marginalized in favor of presentation skills. What had started as an isolated incident was becoming a comprehensive indictment of corporate culture that prioritized optics over outcomes. I realized I was witnessing something unprecedented: real-time documentation of institutional collapse, caused by systems designed to prevent exactly that kind of failure. The behavioral analysis platform I'd built to catch external fraud had identified internal fraud so comprehensive it bordered on institutional sabotage. The irony was mathematically perfect. The people who'd tried to erase my contributions had been undone by the very systems they'd forgotten I'd built. Not through vindictive sabotage but through transparent documentation of objective reality. My phone buzzed with another message from David Chen. "Available for a call this afternoon? We're prepared to discuss a senior technical role that would give you complete autonomy over system architecture and implementation." Complete autonomy. The kind of professional freedom I'd never experienced at Pinnacle Vault despite building the technical foundation that enabled everything else. The chance to architect systems without political interference or executive oversight from people who didn't understand the difference between marketing and mathematics. I looked around my windowless office on the 14th floor where I'd spent months documenting the failure of people who'd been chosen over me 8 times. Where I'd built the evidence that would ultimately destroy their credibility while proving the value of competence over charisma. The revenge was complete, but it wasn't personal. It was procedural. The systems I'd built had simply done what they were designed to do: reveal truth with mathematical precision and let reality speak louder than politics. I typed a response to David Chen, "Available at 4 p.m. for initial discussion." Then I began drafting my resignation letter to Ellen Marquez with the kind of professional courtesy that comes from understanding the difference between institutional failure and personal animosity. They'd tried to bury me, but they'd accidentally given me the perfect laboratory for documenting their incompetence. Now it was time to build something better. The Irongate Analytics office occupied 3 floors of a converted warehouse in Soma with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows. No corporate art or motivational posters, just clean lines and workspaces designed for people who understood that environment shapes thinking. David Chen met me in the lobby wearing jeans and a pullover that looked effortlessly expensive. Mid-40s with quiet intensity that came from building things that mattered without needing external validation. "Mira, thank you for coming. I've been following your work for years. What happened this week just confirmed what everyone in the industry already knew." He led me through open workspaces where engineers hunched over monitors displaying code that looked like mathematical poetry. No cubicles, just collaborative areas with whiteboards covered in algorithmic diagrams that suggested serious technical thinking. The conference room had glass walls offering views of the entire floor. Comfortable chairs around a wooden table with laptops connected to wall displays. Tools for collaboration rather than theater. "Before we discuss specifics, I want you to understand what we're building here." David began pulling up a presentation that looked nothing like corporate marketing. "Irongate isn't trying to disrupt anything. We're building the most technically sophisticated ethical AI systems possible." The slides showed system architectures that made my pulse quicken. Behavioral analysis platforms beyond fraud detection. Real-time ethical assessment algorithms that could identify institutional bias before it embedded in decision-making. Transparency. Frameworks making all algorithmic choices auditable. Our clients want systems that work reliably over decades. Systems built by people who understand technical excellence is the only sustainable competitive advantage. I studied specifications recognizing approaches I'd developed privately for years. Pattern recognition identifying subtle institutional discrimination. Behavioral modeling predicting organizational failure before traditional metrics showed problems. Deep technical work requiring expertise that couldn't be faked through confidence. This is what I wanted to build at Pinnacle Vault before politics became more important than precision. David nodded with understanding. That's why we're interested in you. Not just technical skills but institutional integrity that's rare. In our industry. He showed organizational structure radically different from traditional hierarchies. Technical leads reported directly to executives without intermediate management. Engineering decisions made by engineers with business considerations handled separately by people understanding technical feasibility wasn't negotiable. We're offering Chief of Integrity Analytics. Complete autonomy over system architecture, methodology and implementation. No oversight from people who don't understand technical requirements. No algorithmic compromise for marketing convenience. Chief of Integrity Analytics. A title that never existed at Pinnacle Vault because algorithmic ethics was always secondary to business development. The chance to build systems prioritizing truth over profit, institutional health over individual advancement. He outlined work that sounded like everything I'd wanted to accomplish. Building algorithms identifying hiring bias. Developing systems. Detecting insider trading through behavioral patterns. Creating frameworks auditing institutional decision-making for consistency and fairness. The goal isn't just technical excellence. It's building systems that make institutions more honest, more transparent, more accountable to people they serve. I felt genuine excitement about technical challenges that mattered. Not fraud detection as revenue generation but institutional protection. Not behavioral analysis as marketing optimization but ethical safeguard. There's something else you should know, David said, leaning forward seriously. We've been tracking Pinnacle Vault for weeks. What you built there, monitoring systems exposing executive incompetence, that's exactly the institutional protection our clients need. They hadn't recruited me just for technical skills. They'd recruited me because I'd demonstrated building systems that couldn't be corrupted by people who didn't understand their purpose. We want you to build those same systems here. Designed from the beginning to serve institutional integrity instead of individual advancement. Systems making it impossible for competence to be marginalized by charisma. The offer was everything I'd never known I wanted. Technical autonomy. Combined with ethical purpose. The chance to build systems preventing other engineers from experiencing what I'd endured. Algorithms making institutional fraud as detectable as financial fraud. As if summoned, my phone buzzed with LinkedIn notifications. Direct messages from Meridian Financial's CTO asking about consulting arrangements. Federal Reserve Bank inquiring about technical advisory positions. Venture capital firms requesting technical due diligence expertise. Suddenly everyone wants systems that can't be gamed by executives who don't understand them, I observed. David smiled with satisfaction. Turns out institutional transparency is good business. We spent another hour discussing technical details. Everything about IronGate felt like what Pinnacle Vault could have become if technical excellence remained the primary institutional value. I have one final question. What happens when systems we build reveal uncomfortable truths about client institutions? When algorithms identify bias or incompetence in organizations paying us? David's expression grew serious. We tell them the truth. That's what they're paying for. If they don't want honest assessment, they can hire consultants specializing in comfortable lies. I left feeling excitement I hadn't experienced since earliest Pinnacle Vault days. Technical challenges unconstrained by politics or personality conflicts. My laptop chimed with Ellen's email. The board authorized significant changes to your role and compensation. Available for conversation tomorrow morning? Too late. Institutional damage went beyond personnel changes. Exposed monitoring data. Revealed problems weren't individual failures but systemic corruption prioritizing appearance over achievement. I'd spent 8 years building technical foundation for a company that systematically marginalized technical expertise for presentation skills. Now that foundation provided evidence the marginalization was institutionally destructive. I drafted Ellen's response. Thank you for the offer, but I've decided to pursue opportunities aligning better with my technical priorities. Then composed a longer email accepting IronGate's position with Monday start date. Not just a new job, but chance to build systems preventing other institutions from making mistakes that nearly destroyed Pinnacle Vault. The revenge was complete but not personal. It was procedural. Algorithms simply did what they were designed to do, reveal truth with mathematical precision and let competence speak louder than charisma. 6 months later I returned to Pinnacle Vault as external consultant brought in to design what Ellen Marquez called institutional transparency protocols. The irony wasn't lost on me. The company that buried me in a windowless office was now paying premium consulting rates for expertise they'd marginalized. The 37th floor conference room looked identical but felt completely different. Ellen sat at the mahogany table flanked by skeleton crew board members who'd survived post-town hall reorganization. Colton was gone, officially pursuing entrepreneurial opportunities but actually facing SEC inquiries. Jared had landed at a mid-tier startup where presentation skills better matched technical ambitions. Mira, thank you for agreeing to this consultation. Ellen began with formal politeness, acknowledging our complicated history. We need someone with deep institutional knowledge to help rebuild credibility with clients who've seen our internal performance data. I took the same seat from 8 CEO rejection meetings, but everything else had changed. Instead of asking for advancement, I was being asked to provide irreplaceable expertise. Instead of competing for recognition, I was being recognized as the person understanding the institution better than anyone. The board authorized comprehensive overhaul of decision-making processes. Ellen continued consulting crisis management notes. We want monitoring systems preventing institutional blindness. That led to recent problems. Institutional blindness. Euphemism for systematic marginalization of competence for charisma. Prioritizing executive presentation over algorithmic precision. Organizational dysfunction. My monitoring systems documented with mathematical objectivity. What specific outcomes are you hoping to achieve? Transparency. Accountability. Decision-making processes that can't be gamed by people who don't understand technical implications. Ellen's voice carried exhaustion from months managing crisis after crisis. Systems making competence visible and charisma irrelevant. I opened my laptop, pulling up presentation prepared during commute from Irongate. Technical specifications for behavioral monitoring platforms identifying institutional dysfunction before external visibility. The system I'm proposing goes beyond fraud detection, I explained, advancing to architectural diagrams showing comprehensive organizational analysis. It monitors decision-making patterns, approval velocities, content originality, and institutional integrity metrics. Slides outlined algorithms identifying when executives approved complex technical documents without adequate review time. Behavioral analysis flagging AI-generated content rather than human expertise. Risk assessment predicting client satisfaction. Problems before contract terminations. Think of it as institutional fraud detection. Systems identifying when internal actors pose greater threats to organizational survival than external criminals. Ellen and remaining board members studied specifications with attention, suggesting they finally understood the relationship between algorithmic precision and business sustainability. People who'd learned through painful experience that technical excellence wasn't optional where technical failure meant institutional collapse. Asterisk. The beautiful thing about these systems is they can't be corrupted by people they're designed to monitor. Algorithms don't care about corporate politics or executive charisma. They document patterns and let mathematics determine institutional health. Board member Harrison Chen leaned forward. Would these systems have prevented problems we experienced with previous leadership? Systems would have identified those problems months before public visibility, I replied honestly. But prevention requires institutional commitment to acting on uncomfortable data rather than dismissing it as disloyalty. The question touched on organizational culture that couldn't be solved through technology alone. Monitoring systems could document institutional dysfunction with mathematical precision but couldn't force institutions to prioritize truth over comfort. We're prepared to make that commitment, Ellen said with determination, suggesting the board learned institutional survival required uncomfortable honesty. I outlined comprehensive 18-month implementation program. Behavioral monitoring integrated into all decision-making. Real-time algorithmic assessment of executive communications. Transparency protocols making institutional performance data available to employees, clients, and board members simultaneously. The goal isn't surveillance systems. It's accountability systems. Frameworks making institutional health visible to everyone depending on it. Realizing I was describing everything I'd wanted to build during 8 Pinnacle Vault years. Comprehensive monitoring identifying problems before crises. Transparent decision-making prioritizing evidence over ego. Institutional frameworks making competence more valuable than charisma. There's one final component I'd recommend, I said, advancing to external validation protocols. Regular third-party audits conducted by firms specializing in algorithmic ethics and organizational transparency. Ellen smiled for the first time. Firms like Irongate Analytics? Among others. External assessment by people understanding both technical requirements and institutional implications. Systems ensuring truth remains visible when uncomfortable. The meeting concluded with handshakes, but something more significant occurred. I'd returned to the room where I'd been rejected 8 times, not seeking validation but providing essential expertise obtainable nowhere else. The transformation wasn't personal vindication, it was institutional recognition that technical competence was sustainable business success foundation. Algorithms exposing executive incompetence were now embraced as essential infrastructure, preventing future institutional failure. As I prepared to leave, Ellen asked one final question. What would you tell other engineers in situations similar to what you experienced here? I considered carefully, thinking about brilliant people marginalized by institutions confusing confidence with capability. Engineers whose expertise was dismissed by executives prioritizing presentation over precision. Build systems that can't be ignored. Create value that speaks louder than politics. Remember that truth has its own momentum, sometimes it just takes time to find its voice. Walking out, I passed the 14th floor where my windowless office became storage for obsolete equipment. Exile that felt like burial was actually laboratory space where I'd built evidence, ultimately transforming how institutions measured their own health. My phone buzzed with Angela's message. Saw news about your consultation. How did it feel being back in that conference room? I typed, like visiting a museum of institutional dysfunction. Interesting historically, but not somewhere I'd want to live. Truth was simpler than revenge or vindication. I'd spent 8 years building systems revealing objective reality, and those systems ultimately revealed reality doesn't care about corporate hierarchy or executive charisma. Truth builds trust through mathematical precision rather than persuasive presentation. At Irongate, I was building next-generation systems. Algorithms identifying institutional bias before embedding in decision-making. Behavioral monitoring detecting organizational dysfunction while correctable. Transparency frameworks making competence visible and charisma irrelevant. The empire I'd helped build at Pinnacle Vault collapsed under institutional contradictions. But principles I'd used, technical excellence, algorithmic precision, systematic documentation of objective reality, were now building something better. Not revenge but architecture. Not destruction but construction. Systematic institution building. Creating sustainable value rather than sustainable illusion. Truth builds trust. Everything else is just marketing. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe, it would mean a lot.